The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Lyra Chen pressed her face against the viewport. A dying red star filled her vision, its light washing over everything like old blood. Orbiting that star was a station made of black metal and crystal, spinning slowly in the crimson glow. This was the place where she would either prove herself or die trying. Lyra was 32 years old. She had spent 15 years in Earth's military, rising through the ranks faster than anyone in her generation. She had commanded ships in 3 different conflicts. She had won battles that military schools now taught as examples of brilliant tactics. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was nothing. A student. A test subject. A representative of a species that the galaxy still considered children. The shuttle docked with a soft clang. Lyra grabbed her single bag of belongings and walked through the airlock. The air inside the station smelled strange, like copper, and something sweet she could not name. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's, pulling at her shoulders and making each step feel like she was walking through water. A young alien waited for her at the end of the corridor. It was a Vanthari, though smaller than the pictures she had studied. Its black shell gleamed under the red lights, and its many eyes watched her with an expression she could not read. "Commander Chen," it said. Its voice came out as a series of clicks and hums, but the translator in her ear turned them into flat, emotionless words. "I am Thesic. I will take you to the master." Lyra nodded and followed. They walked through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made her head hurt. The station had not been built for human minds. The Vanthari thought differently, saw the world differently, and their architecture reflected that difference. After what felt like an hour of walking, they reached a large circular room. The walls were covered with screens showing star maps, battle formations, and streams of data in languages Lyra did not recognize. In the center of the room stood a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Galactic was massive. He stood 8 feet tall, his black carapace scarred from centuries of war. His compound eyes reflected the red light of the screens around him, making him look like a demon from old Earth stories. When he turned to face her, Lyra felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. "So," he said, his voice deeper and more complex than his assistant's, "this is what humanity sends me. A small thing. Fragile. Short-lived." Lyra stood straight and met his gaze. "I am Commander Lyra Chen, of Earth's United Fleet. I am here to learn." Galactic made a sound that her translator could not process. It might have been laughter. "Learn," he repeated. "Yes. That is what they all say. The Kasori said they wanted to learn. The Threll said they wanted to learn. The Mavinok said they wanted to learn." He moved closer, and Lyra forced herself not to step back. "They all failed. 3 of them died in the process. Do you know why?" "No," Lyra said. "Because learning is not enough. Any creature can memorize facts and repeat patterns. What I teach here is not knowledge. It is transformation. You must become something more than what you are. You must break yourself apart and rebuild from the pieces." He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. Most species cannot survive that process. Their minds are too rigid, their egos too fragile. They would rather die than admit that everything they believe is wrong. Lyra did not blink. "I am not most species." "No?" Galactic straightened and turned away. "Your species has been traveling between stars for less than 200 years. The Vanthari have ruled this region of space for 12,000 years. We have forgotten more about war than your entire civilization has ever learned. You are not special, Commander Chen. You are simply the latest experiment in a very long series of failures." He gestured toward a doorway on the far side of the room. "Your quarters are through there. They are small and uncomfortable. You will not complain. Tomorrow, at first light, your training begins. I suggest you rest while you can." Lyra picked up her bag and walked toward the doorway. Before she passed through, she stopped and looked back. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "If you expect us all to fail, why agree to train us?" Galactic was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Because I have lived for 900 years, Commander Chen. I have fought in wars you cannot imagine. I have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. And in all that time, I have never found an equal. Never found a mind that could match mine. His compound eyes seem to dim. Perhaps I keep searching because the alternative is too lonely to accept. He turned back to his screens. Go. Rest. Tomorrow. You will understand what you have agreed to. Lyra walked through the doorway and found a small room with a hard bed, a tiny bathroom, and nothing else. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall. She thought about Earth, so far away now. She thought about her family, who had not understood why she volunteered for this mission. She thought about the 17 candidates who had come before her, all of them brilliant, all of them determined, all of them broken by what waited in this station. But she also thought about why she was really here. Humanity needed this. Not just the military knowledge, not just the strategic training, but proof. Proof that humans could stand beside the ancient races of the galaxy. Proof that they were worthy of respect. The Coalition had given Earth a seat at the table, but it was a seat in the corner, where the children sat. Every other species looked at humans and saw primitives, savages who had stumbled into space before they were ready. Lyra was here to change that. She lay down on the hard bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, her trial would begin. Tomorrow, she would face a teacher who expected her to fail, who had watched dozens fail before her, who had seen 3 candidates die rather than admit defeat. But Lyra Chen had never failed at anything in her life. She was not about to start now. The red light of the dying star crept through a tiny window, painting her room in shades of blood. Somewhere in the station, Kelvorix was watching those same screens, planning tomorrow's first lesson, already calculating how long it would take to break her. He did not know her yet. He would learn. The first month was hell. Kelvorix woke her at random hours, sometimes letting her sleep for only 2 hours before dragging her to the command center. He gave her impossible problems to solve. Battles where every option led to defeat. Puzzles where the rules changed halfway through. When she failed, he did not yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he simply looked at her with those ancient eyes and said nothing, letting his silence speak louder than any words. She learned to survive on small pieces of food and short bursts of sleep. She learned to think while exhausted, to analyze while her hands shook and her vision blurred. Her body grew thin. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. But she did not break. The simulations were the worst part. Kelvorix would place her in command of fleets, sometimes human ships and sometimes alien ones, and throw impossible situations at her. Enemy ambushes, system failures, crew mutinies, civilian populations that needed saving. He forced her to make choices that had no good answers, choices where people would die no matter what she decided. In one simulation, she had to choose between saving a transport full of children or protecting a supply line that would keep 3 colonies alive. She chose the supply line. 20,000 children died in the simulation, and she watched their ship burn on the view screen while tears ran down her face. You made the correct choice, Kelvorix said afterward. A true strategist does not let emotion cloud judgment. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Lyra wiped her face with the back of her hand. Is that what you believe? That emotions are weakness? I believe that emotions are tools, Kelvorix replied. Like any tool, they can be useful or dangerous depending on how they are used. The Vanthari learned long ago to separate emotion from decision. We feel, but we do not let feeling guide us. And that is why you conquered half a galaxy. Yes, Lyra looked at the frozen image on the screen. The burning transport, the tiny escape pods that had launched too late. Then, why did you stop? Kelvorix went very still, his compound eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. What do you mean? The Vanthari Empire stopped expanding 800 years ago. You had the ships, the resources, the strategic superiority. You could have taken the whole galaxy, but you stopped. She turned to face him fully. Why? For a long moment, Kelvorix did not answer. Then he made that strange sound again, the one her translator could not process. You are observant, he said, more observant than the others. He moved to one of the screens and pulled up a star map. Half of it glowed gold, marking Vanthari territory. We stopped because we had achieved optimal territory. Further expansion would have required resources that exceeded the benefits. The mathematics simply did not support continued growth. The mathematics, Lyra repeated. So you calculated your way to stagnation. We calculated our way to stability. There is a difference. Is there? Lyra stepped closer to the map. 800 years ago, you were the greatest power in the galaxy. Now the coalition exists. New species rise every century. Some of them will eventually match your strength, maybe exceed it. And you have done nothing to prepare for that because your mathematics told you to sit still. Kalvorix's mandibles clicked together. A sound she had learned meant irritation. You speak of things you do not understand. The Vanthari way has served us for 12,000 years. The Vanthari way is a cage, Lyra said quietly. You have become so perfect at what you do that you have forgotten how to do anything else. She expected him to dismiss her, to mock her primitive human thinking. Instead, he turned away and looked at the star map in silence. Perhaps, he said finally. But it is a cage that keeps us alive. Better to be perfectly safe than dangerously creative. Is it? He did not answer. The weeks continued to pass. Lyra studied Vanthari tactics with obsessive focus, memorizing their formations, their timing, their decision patterns. She ran hundreds of simulations against Vanthari opponents and lost almost every single one. Their strategies were like mathematics given form, perfect equations of force and movement that left no room for error. But Lyra was not looking for ways to beat them directly. She was looking for something else. She noticed that Vanthari fleets always responded to threats in predictable ways. Not predictable to most species, but predictable to her, because she had spent so many hours studying them. Every action had an optimal counter. Every attack had an optimal defense. Their perfection was also their pattern, and patterns could be exploited. She began to test her theory in small ways. In simulations, she would make deliberately suboptimal moves just to see how the Vanthari AI responded. She found that it would always take several moments to recalculate when faced with decisions that made no strategic sense. Those moments were small, but they were real. Kalvorix noticed her experiments but said nothing. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not read. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was concern. With the Vanthari, it was impossible to tell. One night, after a particularly brutal 18-hour session, Lyra sat in her quarters and stared at the wall. Her body ached. Her mind felt like it had been scraped raw, but underneath the exhaustion, something else burned. She was beginning to understand. The Vanthari were not invincible. They were not unbeatable. They had simply convinced the galaxy that their way was the only way, and everyone had believed them. Species that tried to match Vanthari perfection would always lose because no one could match 12,000 years of refinement. But what if someone refused to play that game at all? What if the answer was not to become better at the Vanthari way, but to reject it entirely? Lyra pulled out a small tablet and began to write notes. Ideas flowed faster than she could record them. Strategies that no Vanthari would ever use because they defied optimal thinking. Tactics that relied on chaos instead of order. Plans that required the enemy to make mistakes because they could not comprehend what they were seeing. Humanity had always been good at that kind of thinking. Human history was full of victories won by people who refused to accept the rules of engagement. Guerrilla fighters who defeated empires. Generals who won battles by doing the unexpected. Leaders who changed the course of wars by making decisions that seemed insane until they worked. Maybe that was what humanity could offer the galaxy. Not perfection. Not optimization. Something older and stranger and more dangerous. The willingness to be unpredictable. Lyra put down her tablet and smiled for the first time in weeks. She was ready for whatever came next. 3 months into her training, Lyra woke to darkness. The red light that always filtered through her window was gone. The soft hum of the station's systems had changed pitch. Something was different. She dressed quickly and stepped into the corridor. The emergency lights cast everything in harsh white, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. No one was there to greet her. No assistant waited to guide her to the day's lesson. Lyra made her way to the command center on her own. She had walked this path so many times that her feet knew it without thought. When she arrived, the door slid open to reveal Kalvorix standing in the center of the room, surrounded by holographic displays that filled the air with light. "You are awake," he said without turning. "Good. Today is different. I noticed." Lyra stepped closer and looked at the displays. Her breath caught in her throat. The hologram showed a planet, blue and green and beautiful, orbited by 2 small moons. Around the planet hung 12 ships, tiny compared to the world they protected. They were human vessels, she realized. Old Earth designs from before the Coalition era, blocky and functional and hopelessly outdated. And moving toward that planet was a fleet of 200 warships, Vanthari warships. "This is the siege of Kethros IV, Kalvorik said. "A human colony, 12,000 settlers, established during the expansion period, before your species joined the Coalition." He turned to face her. "The Vanthari Empire decided they had expanded too close to our borders. We sent a fleet to remove them." Lyra stared at the display. She had never heard of Kethros IV. The name was not in any history she had studied. What happened? The colony was destroyed. Every settler killed. Every ship burned. The battle lasted 6 hours from first contact to final victory. Kalvorix's voice carried no emotion. It was considered a perfect engagement. Our war colleges still teach it as an example of optimal force application. You killed 12,000 people. We eliminated a threat to our borders. The mathematics supported the decision. Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had known the Vanthari had fought wars, had conquered and destroyed like any other empire, but hearing it spoken so plainly, about her own species, made it real in a way that history books never could. "Why are you showing me this?" Kalvorix moved to the central console and entered a command. The display shifted, resetting to a point before the battle began. The Vanthari fleet hung in space, waiting. The human colony floated peacefully, unaware of the death approaching. "This is your final examination," Kalvorix said. "You will command the defense of Kethros IV." Lyra's mouth went dry. The historical battle lasted 6 hours. "You just said so." "Yes." The human defenders fought bravely but foolishly. They attacked in waves, trying to delay the inevitable. Each attack was predicted, countered, and destroyed. By the end, not a single human ship remained, his compound eyes fixed on her. "You will do better, or you will fail." Lyra walked slowly around the display, studying it from every angle. 12 frigates against 200 warships. The numbers were not just unfair. They were impossible. Even if she somehow destroyed 10 Vanthari ships for every one she lost, she would still be overwhelmed in the first hour. "There must be a way," she said quietly. "You would not give me an impossible test, would I not?" Kalvorix made that strange sound again. "Many of my students have asked the same question. They assumed I wanted them to succeed. They assumed there was an answer hidden somewhere in the problem, if only they were clever enough to find it." He shook his head slowly. "Some tests exist only to show us our limitations. Perhaps this is such a test. Or perhaps it is a test of something else entirely." Kalvorix tilted his head. "Explain." Lyra pointed at the Vanthari fleet. "Your ships are arranged in a standard siege formation. Optimal coverage of all approach vectors. Maximum efficiency for coordinated strikes. Every ship knows exactly where to be and when to be there." "Correct. It is the formation we have used for thousands of years, and that is the problem." Lyra turned to face him. "Your formation assumes resistance. It assumes the defenders will fight back, will try to break through, will attempt to delay or escape. Every ship is positioned to counter a specific type of response." "Again, correct. What is your point?" Lyra smiled slightly. "My point is that your formation is a question. It asks, how will the enemy resist? And it has prepared answers for every possible response. But what if the enemy does not respond at all? What happens when the question has no answer?" Kalvorix went very still. His compound eyes seemed to dim slightly as he processed her words. "That is not strategy," he said finally. "That is surrender." "Is it?" Lyra walked to the command console and placed her hands on the controls. "Let me show you." The simulation began. On the display, 200 Vanthari warships advanced toward Kethros IV. Their formation was perfect, a wall of death moving with mathematical precision. Any other commander would have scrambled their frigates, sent them racing to meet the enemy, tried to buy time through sacrifice. Lyra did nothing. Her 12 frigates held position around the planet. Their weapons remained cold. Their engines stayed quiet. The colony below continued its normal operations, as if nothing was happening. The Vanthari fleet reached optimal engagement range and stopped. "They are waiting," Lyra said softly. "Waiting for me to reveal my strategy so they can counter it. But I have no strategy to reveal. I am just standing here." Kale Vorix watched the display with an intensity she had never seen before. "This is foolish. They will simply advance and destroy you. Will they? Look at their formation. It is designed for efficiency, not aggression. They will not fire until they understand what they are facing. That is the Vanthari way. Patience, analysis, perfect response to perfect understanding." Minutes passed. On the display, the Vanthari fleet held position, waiting, analyzing, trying to understand a defense that made no sense. "What you are doing is not possible," Kalvorix said. His voice sounded strange, almost uncertain. "No enemy has ever simply refused to engage." "Then perhaps," Lyra replied, "it is time someone did." The clock showed 30 minutes since the simulation began. The original battle had been half over by now. Lyra's colony still stood untouched. Hours passed in silence. The holographic display showed 2 fleets frozen in space, neither moving, neither attacking. The Vanthari armada hung like a wall of stars, their formation still perfect, still waiting. Lyra's 12 frigates orbited Kethros IV in a slow, peaceful pattern, as if they were on parade duty rather than facing extinction. Kalvorix had not spoken in over 3 hours. He stood at the edge of the room, watching the display with those ancient eyes, his mandibles occasionally clicking together in what Lyra had learned was deep thought. Several times she caught him reaching toward the controls as if to end the simulation, then pulling back. She understood his confusion. She was doing something impossible. Not impossible in the way of great feats or clever tricks, but impossible in a deeper way. She was refusing to exist within the framework that had defined galactic warfare for thousands of years. "Your supply levels are dropping," Kalvorix said finally, breaking the silence. "Every hour you wait, your frigates consume fuel and oxygen. You cannot maintain this position forever. Neither can they." Lyra pointed at the Vanthari fleet. Small numbers flickered next to each ship, showing resource consumption. A siege fleet burned through supplies quickly. They had come prepared for a 6-hour battle, not an indefinite standoff. "They have 200 ships," Kalvorix countered. "They can rotate vessels back to resupply while maintaining the siege. Can they?" Lyra pulled up a secondary display showing the fleet's command structure. Their formation is built around the flagship's fire coordination system. If they rotate ships, they have to constantly recalculate firing solutions. That creates windows of vulnerability. Tiny windows, meaningless, maybe. But they do not know that I know about those windows. Every time they rotate, they have to wonder if that is the moment I will strike. She smiled slightly. "I am making them doubt themselves, Kalvorix. Not with weapons, with silence." The clock showed 8 hours. Then 10. Then 12. On the display, the Vanthari fleet began to shift. It was subtle at first. Tiny adjustments in positioning that only someone who had studied Vanthari tactics for months would notice. But Lyra noticed. She noticed everything. "They are getting nervous," she said. "Vanthari do not get nervous. Every thinking creature gets nervous when reality stops making sense. Your commanders are trained to respond to actions with counteractions. They have plans for every possible attack, every possible defense, but they have no plan for nothing." She turned to face him. "I am nothing, Kalvorix. I am a blank space where an enemy should be, and that terrifies them." Kalvorix made a sound she had never heard before, a low harmonic that vibrated through her bones. "You speak of my people as if they are children afraid of the dark. I speak of every intelligent species that has ever existed. Fear of the unknown is universal. It is what kept your ancestors alive before they built their first ships. It is what drives all of us to seek understanding, to find patterns, to create order from chaos. She gestured at the frozen fleets. But what happens when someone refuses to be understood? When they become chaos itself? Chaos loses, Kelvorix said firmly. Order always defeats chaos in the end. This is the fundamental truth of warfare. Is it? Show me where that is written in the laws of physics. He had no answer. Hour 15 arrived. The Vanthari fleet's resource calculations were now visibly strained. Ships that had expected to be home by now were running low on certain supplies. Nothing critical yet. But the numbers were trending in the wrong direction. And still Lyra did not move. Kelvorix suddenly stepped forward and pointed at the display. Enough. This proves nothing. You are simply delaying the inevitable. The moment the Vanthari commander decides to attack, you will be destroyed in minutes. Then why has he not decided? Because? Kelvorix stopped. Because he is waiting for more information. Because attacking without understanding the enemy's strategy violates every principle of Vanthari warfare. Because your entire civilization has spent 12,000 years building a system that requires knowing the enemy's plan before you move against them. Lyra kept her voice calm, almost gentle. I have removed myself from your system, Kelvorix. I am not playing your game. I am not playing any game. And your commander does not know what to do with someone who refuses to play. The clock reached 18 hours. On the display, something changed. The Vanthari flagship began broadcasting on all frequencies. Lyra could not understand the language, but Kelvorix went completely still when he heard it. What is he saying? He is requesting guidance from High Command. Kelvorix's voice was barely above a whisper. He is asking what to do. Lyra felt a surge of triumph but kept her face neutral. A Vanthari commander, in charge of 200 warships, facing 12 ancient frigates, and a defenseless colony. And he is asking for help. This has never happened before. I know. Hour 20 arrived. The Vanthari fleet was now in visible disarray. Ships had begun drifting out of their perfect formation, their commanders uncertain whether to maintain position or prepare for a fight that never came. The flagship had sent 17 messages to High Command and received only silence in return. No one in the Vanthari Empire knew how to respond to what was happening. Lyra stood at the center of the command room, her hands still resting lightly on controls she had never touched. She had not moved in 20 hours. Her feet ached, her eyes burned, but inside, she felt more alive than she had in years. You asked me once why I volunteered for this, she said to Kelvorix. Why I came here knowing I would probably fail like all the others. I remember. It was not because I wanted to learn your tactics. It was not because I wanted to become like you. She turned to face him fully. It was because humanity needs to understand something important about itself. We are new to this galaxy, young and weak and ignorant of so many things. But we have one gift that older species have forgotten. What gift? The courage to do nothing. She gestured at the display. Your species conquered half a galaxy because you learned to do everything right. Every move calculated. Every action optimized. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that sometimes the right move is no move at all. Sometimes strength means standing still while the universe demands that you run. Kelvorix stared at her for a long moment. Then his mandibles clicked together in a pattern she had never heard before. You are either the wisest human I have ever met, he said slowly, or the most insane. Lyra smiled. Why not both? The clock showed 20 hours and 43 minutes. The Vanthari commander finally broke. The Vanthari commander made his decision at 20 hours and 47 minutes. Lyra watched on the display as the massive fleet began to reorganize. Ships that had held perfect positions for almost a day now split apart, forming smaller groups that spread across the system. It was a probing maneuver, designed to test defenses from multiple angles at once. It was also exactly what she had been waiting for. He is dividing his forces, Kelvorix observed. His voice had changed over the past few hours. The cold certainty was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like curiosity. Sending groups to flank your position from 6 different vectors. I see it. His flagship is now exposed. The command ship has only 12 escorts instead of 40. I see that too. Lyra's hands finally moved. After 20 hours of perfect stillness, her fingers danced across the controls with speed that surprised even her. Commands flowed to her 12 frigates, breaking them from their peaceful orbit and sending them racing toward a single point in space. The Vanthari commander saw the movement and reacted instantly. His divided fleet began to converge, rushing back toward the flagship to provide protection. But they were too far away. They had spread too thin, chasing a threat that existed only in their imagination. Lyra's frigates did not attack the flagship directly. That would have been the obvious move, the expected move, the move that Vanthari tactics had prepared for. Instead, they flew past the flagship in a tight formation, so close that their engine wash rattled the great ship's hull. And then they fired. Not at the flagship, not at the escorts. They fired at the supply ships hiding behind the battle line. The Vanthari had been so focused on the colony, so prepared for a frontal assault, that they had placed their logistics vessels in what should have been the safest position. No sane enemy would ever bypass the warships to attack the supply train. It violated every principle of military strategy. But Lyra was not being sane. She was being human. 4 supply ships exploded in the first volley, 3 more in the second. Lyra lost 2 frigates to the desperate fire of nearby escorts, but the remaining 10 pressed forward, weaving through the chaos they had created. Impossible, Calvorix breathed. The timing, the angle of approach. You planned this 20 hours ago. I planned for the possibility. Lyra's eyes never left the display. I did not know exactly when he would divide his fleet, but I knew he would. Patience is a Vanthari virtue. But patience has limits. Everyone breaks eventually. On the display, the Vanthari fleet was in complete disarray. Ships rushed back toward the flagship, colliding with each other in their haste, blocking firing solutions and creating a chaos of panicked movement. The perfect formation had shattered. The mathematical precision had dissolved into fear and confusion. Lyra's frigates continued their attack, striking at targets of opportunity, never staying in one place long enough to be cornered. 3 more of her ships died, but they took 17 Vanthari vessels with them. Supply ships, communication relays, a hospital vessel that carried the fleet's only advanced medical facility. And then her remaining frigates did something impossible. They retreated, with the Vanthari fleet in chaos, with dozens of damaged ships bleeding atmosphere and fuel. Lyra ordered her surviving 7 frigates to fall back to the colony. They formed a defensive ring around Kethros IV and went still once again. The clock showed 21 hours and 12 minutes. What are you doing? Calvorix demanded. You have the advantage. Press the attack. Destroy them while they are vulnerable. No. Why not? Lyra turned to face him, and her eyes held an intensity that made even the ancient Vanthari take a step back, because this was never about destroying them. This was about showing them something they have never seen before. An enemy that cannot be predicted. An opponent that does not follow the rules. She pointed at the display, where the surviving Vanthari ships were slowly reforming their shattered lines. Look at them. They came here with 200 ships and absolute confidence. Now they have lost 47 vessels. Their supplies are crippled, and they do not understand what happened. They will remember this day for the rest of their lives. The Vanthari fleet held position for almost 3 more hours. Lyra watched them struggle to rebuild their formation, to restore order from the chaos she had created. But something had changed. The precise movements were gone. Ships hesitated before executing commands. Commanders second-guessed their orders. At exactly 24 hours, the simulation ended. The holographic display froze, then faded to black. Numbers appeared in the air, showing the final results. 7 human frigates survived. The colony was intact. 47 Vanthari ships destroyed, including most of the fleet's supply capability. Calvorix stood in silence for a very long time. The siege of Kethros IV was studied by every Vanthari strategist for 800 years, he said finally. It was considered perfect, unimprovable, a mathematical ideal. He turned to face Lyra, and she saw something in his compound eyes that she had never seen before. Respect. True respect, from one warrior to another. You have unmade perfection. No, Lyra said quietly. I just proved that perfection is a weakness when it becomes predictable. Your species forgot that warfare is not mathematics. It is psychology. It is will against will. And sometimes the strongest will belongs to the one who refuses to move. Calvorix inclined his head, the Vanthari gesture of acknowledgement between equals. You have passed my examination, Commander Chen. You are the first non-Vanthari to do so in 900 years. Lyra should have felt triumph. She should have felt joy and relief and pride. But standing there in the command center, surrounded by the ghosts of a battle that had never really happened, she only felt tired. What now? She asked. Now you return to your people. Calvorix moved to the central console and began entering commands. I will send my report to the coalition. Humanity will no longer sit in the corner of the Great Table. You have earned your place beside the ancient races. And you? The old warrior paused. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that 900 years of life had placed upon him. I will think about what you have shown me. Perhaps the Vanthari way is not the only way. Perhaps our perfection has become our prison, as you said. End quote. He turned to look at her one final time. You have given me something I did not expect to find, Commander Chen. A reason to question everything I thought I knew. Lyra walked toward the exit, then stopped at the doorway. Calvorix. What happened to the real Kethros IV? The one in history, not the simulation? The Vanthari was silent for a moment. The colony was destroyed. 12,000 humans died. It was efficient. I am sorry. So am I. He turned back to his console. Safe travels, Commander Chen. I suspect the galaxy will be hearing your name for a very long time. Lyra walked through the corridors of the station one final time. The red light of the dying star painted everything in shades of crimson. But it no longer felt oppressive. It felt almost beautiful. She had come here as a test subject, an experiment, a representative of a species that the galaxy considered children. She left as something else entirely. And somewhere in the darkness of space, among the billions of stars that made up the Coalition's territory, a small blue world called Earth was waiting to hear what she had learned. The lesson was simple, really. Sometimes the greatest strength is the courage to stand still, to refuse the expected, to become something that cannot be calculated or predicted or defeated by mathematics alone. Humanity would teach the galaxy that lesson, one impossible victory at a time.